After paying my tenants overdue rent with my own savings, I came home to find a note saying they were taking over my house and I had 30 days to move out. They called me a senile old woman who didn't understand modern tenant laws. But what I did next left them homeless, bankrupt, and facing criminal charges. I'm glad you're here with me today. Follow my story until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this warning has reached about predatory tenants who target elderly homeowners. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty people could inflict on each other. Standing in my own kitchen that Tuesday afternoon in Millbrook Heights, reading the most outrageous letter I'd ever received, I realized I was wrong. There were depths of human greed I'd never imagined. My name is Dorothy Caldwell, and I've lived in the same house on Magnolia Street for 47 years. It's a charming two-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that my late husband Benjamin and I bought when we were young and full of dreams. After Benjamin passed 6 years ago from cancer, the house felt enormous, echoing with memories but silent with loneliness. Benjamin had been an electrical engineer at Westfield Manufacturing, and I'd worked as a school librarian at Millbrook Elementary for 32 years. We'd raised our daughter Rachel in this house, watched her graduate valedictorian, walk down the aisle, and eventually moved to Portland with her husband for his medical residency. Rachel called every Sunday, but visits were rare. Life had scattered our little family across the country, and at 70, I found myself rattling around in a house meant for a family. The property taxes in Millbrook Heights had tripled over the years as the neighborhood gentrified. Young professionals were buying up the older homes, renovating them into showplaces. My fixed income from Benjamin's pension and Social Security wasn't keeping pace with the rising costs. When my furnace died last winter, the $4,800 repair bill nearly wiped out my emergency fund. That's when my neighbor Constance Hartley suggested I consider renting out rooms. "Dorothy, dear," she'd said over coffee in my kitchen, "this house has 4 bedrooms. You're only using 1. Why not find some nice young people who need a place to stay? The extra income would help with expenses, and you'd have company." The idea terrified me initially. Benjamin and I had never had strangers in our home. But as I looked at my dwindling bank statements and the stack of bills accumulating on the kitchen counter, desperation overrode fear. I posted an ad on Rent Finder and several local Facebook housing groups. Furnished rooms available in quiet Millbrook Heights. Mature, responsible tenants preferred. References required. The responses were overwhelming. Young professionals, college students, even a few retirees looking to downsize, contacted me. Most wanted to take over the entire house or demanded lease terms I wasn't comfortable with. Then Garrett Vance and Sabrina Chen responded to my ad. Garrett was 29, worked in digital marketing for a startup downtown, and just relocated from Denver. He had thick brown hair, an easy smile, and spoke with the kind of confidence that came from success in a competitive field. Sabrina was 31, claimed to run a successful online boutique specializing in vintage jewelry, and spoke passionately about supporting local small businesses. She had long black hair, always perfectly styled, and dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. When they came to view the rooms on a sunny day in March morning, they seemed like the answer to my prayers. "Mrs. Caldwell, this house is absolutely beautiful," Sabrina gushed as I showed them through the guest bedrooms upstairs. "You can tell it's been loved and cared for. We would be so honored to be part of maintaining its character." Garrett nodded enthusiastically. "We're not party people or anything like that. I work from home most days and Sabrina travels for her business. We're looking for a quiet, stable place where we can focus on our careers and maybe save up for our own home eventually." They dressed professionally. Garrett in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, Sabrina in a tasteful sundress and cardigan. They asked thoughtful questions about the neighborhood, complimented my garden, and even offered to help with yard work. When Sabrina noticed the framed photos of Benjamin and me on the mantel, she asked about our life together with what seemed like genuine interest. You can see how much love went into this home, she told Garrett. Mrs. Caldwell and your husband created something really special here. The references they provided checked out. Garrett's previous landlord in Denver described him as quiet, clean, and always paid on time. Sabrina's reference from Chicago apartment complex called her responsible and considerate. When they handed me first month rent, last month rent, and security deposit, $3,600 in crisp $100 bills, I felt like I'd won the lottery. We really appreciate you giving us this opportunity, Garrett said as we shook hands on the agreement. It's tough out there for people our age trying to establish themselves. Having a landlord who understands that means everything. The written agreement was simple. $1,200 per month for the 2 upstairs bedrooms, shared use of the common areas, utilities included. They'd signed it eagerly, adding their neat signatures below mine. Looking back, I realize how naive I was to trust a basic rental agreement without getting it notarized or consulting a lawyer.
The first month was blissful. They kept their spaces immaculate, were quiet during evening hours, and always greeted me warmly when our paths crossed. Sabrina often brought me flowers from the farmer's market, saying they reminded her of arrangements her grandmother used to make. Garrett helped me figure out how to stream movies on my television and set up a more secure Wi-Fi network. "You're so sweet to help an old lady with technology," I told him one evening as he patiently showed me how to use the new router. "You're not old, Mrs. Caldwell," he said with a charming smile. "You're vintage, and vintage things are valuable." For the first time since Benjamin's death, the house felt alive again. I heard laughter from upstairs, smelled coffee brewing early in the morning, and felt a sense of purpose in maintaining a home for others. The extra $1,200 monthly income allowed me to pay bills without stress, and even put a little money back into savings. But subtle changes began in their second month. Garrett mentioned that the internet speed was pretty slow for his work needs, and suggested I upgrade to a higher-tier plan. "It would benefit all of us," he explained, "and since I work from home, I could split the difference in cost with you." The upgrade cost an additional $40 per month, but it seemed reasonable. Garrett was contributing to household expenses, and faster internet would help me too. I agreed, not realizing this was the first test of my boundaries. Sabrina started commenting on the house's potential. She'd mentioned how beautiful the hardwood floors would look refinished, or how opening up the wall between the kitchen and dining room would create better flow. Not that there's anything wrong with how it is now, I just have an eye for design, and I can see what this place could become. When I didn't immediately respond to these suggestions, they became more persistent. Garrett began leaving real estate magazines on the kitchen counter with articles circled about maximizing property value through strategic renovations. Sabrina started taking photos of different rooms, claiming she was documenting design inspiration for her future home. Their rent for the second month arrived 3 days late. When I mentioned it, Sabrina looked surprised. "Oh, I thought we'd discussed this. Garrett and I have been putting together some improvement plans for the house. We figured we could offset this month's rent against the consultation work we've been doing." I was confused. Consultation work? I didn't ask for any consultation. "Well, no, but we've been researching comparable properties in the neighborhood, analyzing market trends, identifying cost-effective upgrades that would increase your home's value. That's valuable work, Mrs. Caldwell. Most people pay thousands for that kind of professional analysis." They showed me printed pages from real estate websites, highlighted charts about property values in Millbrook Heights, and a hand-drawn floor plan with suggested modifications. The research looked professional and thorough. Maybe this was how things worked now with younger tenants who understood technology and market trends better than I did. Something felt off, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. They were young, educated, and clearly knew more about real estate trends than I did. Maybe this was how things worked now. I accepted their explanation and waited for the rent check. It never came. When I asked about it a week later, Sabrina seemed hurt by the question. "Mrs. Caldwell, I think there might be some confusion about our arrangement here.
We're not traditional tenants. We're more like partners. We're investing our time, expertise, and energy into improving your property. The value we're adding far exceeds the monthly rent amount. But we agreed on $1,200 per month. I pulled out our written agreement. Garrett took the paper and studied it with a frown. This is pretty basic, Mrs. Caldwell. It doesn't account for the modern realities of shared living arrangements. We need to update this to reflect our actual relationship. Their actual relationship? I was getting more confused by the day. Benjamin had always handled our rental properties when we'd briefly owned a duplex in our 40s. I'd never dealt directly with tenant relationships and wasn't sure what was normal. By the third month, they'd stopped pretending to pay rent altogether. Instead, they presented me with a handwritten list of improvements they'd made to the property. Researching new appliances, $500 value. Designing landscaping plans, $300 value. Deep cleaning the basement, $200 value. Organizing the garage, $150 value. See? Sabrina said, pointing to the total at the bottom of the page. We've actually contributed $1,150 worth of work this month. We only owe you $50. I stared at the list in disbelief. They'd organized my garage without asking, moving boxes of Benjamin's belongings to make room for their own storage. They'd thrown away plants in my basement that I was overwintering for spring planting. They'd measured my kitchen appliances and researched replacements I'd never said I wanted. You threw away my begonias, I said weakly. Those old plants were probably harboring mold, Garrett said dismissively. We were protecting your health. You should be thanking us. The casual way he dismissed my concerns made me feel small and foolish. These were plants I'd been nurturing for 3 years, descendants of bulbs Benjamin had given me for our anniversary. But Garrett spoke with such authority, such certainty, that I began to doubt whether keeping old plants in the basement was actually a good idea. That's when I started to feel afraid in my own home.
The fourth month brought even bolder behavior. They began referring to the house as ours in casual conversation. Sabrina would tell delivery drivers that we weren't expecting packages. Garrett started answering the landline phone with Vance Chen residents, as if they'd hyphenated their names and claimed ownership. When my daughter Rachel called one Sunday and Garrett answered, she was confused. "Mom, who was that man? He said you were busy and took a message instead of getting you." I'd been sitting right there in the living room, perfectly available to talk. When I confronted Garrett about it, he seemed genuinely puzzled by my concern. "I was just being helpful, Mrs. Caldwell. You looked tired and I thought you might want to rest. I can call Rachel back for you if you want." The way he said, "I can call Rachel back," as if he was doing me a favor by managing my relationship with my own daughter, made my skin crawl. But when I tried to explain why this bothered me, he looked at me with such patient concern that I felt like I was overreacting. They'd also begun making physical changes to the house without permission. Sabrina replaced the shower curtain in the main bathroom with something she called more contemporary, a stark white plastic thing that made the bathroom feel cold and institutional. Garrett moved furniture around in the living room, claiming the new arrangement created better energy flow. They hung their own artwork in the hallways, taking down family photos that had been in the same spots for decades. "Where did you put the picture of Benjamin and me at Yellowstone?" I asked when I noticed it missing from the upstairs hallway. "Oh, that old thing?" Sabrina said airily. "We put it somewhere safe. The frame was getting tarnished, and we thought you might want to get it restored professionally." But when I asked to see it, they couldn't seem to remember exactly where they'd put it for safekeeping. 3 weeks later, I found it in a box in the garage, frame cracked and glass broken. When I confronted them, they claimed they had no idea how it had been damaged. By the 5th month, I felt like a stranger in my own home. They'd rearranged the kitchen, moving dishes and utensils to locations that made sense to them, but left me constantly searching for things I'd kept in the same places for decades. They'd reprogrammed the thermostat to their preferred settings, And when I tried to adjust it, Garrett explained that their temperature was more energy efficient and better for the house. They'd even changed the Wi-Fi password without telling me, leaving me unable to access the internet I was paying for. When I asked for the new password, Sabrina said they'd upgraded the security and would help me connect my devices when I needed it. But somehow there was never a convenient time for them to help, leaving me effectively cut off from email and the online banking I'd grown comfortable using. When I tried to address these issues, they'd exchange glances that made me feel foolish and paranoid. "Mrs. Caldwell," Sabrina said in the patient tone one might use with a confused child, "we're just trying to help modernize things a bit. Change is hard, we understand that, but sometimes we resist things that are actually good for us." "I liked the house the way it was," I said. "Of course you did, but you have to trust that we can see things you might not notice. We're younger, we understand current trends and efficiency improvements. Just because something has always been done one way doesn't mean it's the best way." Their condescension was becoming unbearable, but worse was the creeping feeling that I was losing control of my own life. When the mail came, they'd bring it in and sort through it, claiming they were just being helpful. But I noticed that bills were sometimes opened before I saw them, and they'd offered to help me understand complicated statements from the bank or insurance company. When repair people came to fix the leaky faucet or service the furnace, Garrett would greet them at the door and explain what needed to be done, as if he was the homeowner. He spoke with such authority about the house systems that contractors naturally assumed he belonged there. "Your grandson seems to know a lot about the house systems," the furnace technician told me, after Garrett had spent 20 minutes explaining the heating issues. "He's not my grandson," I said. "He's a tenant." The technician looked confused. "Oh, he introduced himself as part of the family, said he was helping manage the property." That night, I lay awake thinking about that conversation. How had I lost so much control so quickly? When had these people gone from being helpful tenants to taking over my life? And why did everyone seem to accept their authority over my house more readily than they accepted mine? The 6th month brought the final escalation. Their behavior became openly aggressive. When I asked about the rent they'd been promising to catch up on for months, Sabrina laughed. "Mrs. Caldwell, you really need to let go of this obsession with rent. We're partners now. We're building something together. The traditional landlord-tenant model is outdated." "This is my house," I said, my voice shaking. "I own it. I pay the mortgage." "Actually," Garrett said, settling into Benjamin's favorite armchair as if he belonged there, "ownership is more complicated than that. We've been living here for months, improving the property, investing our time and resources. We have equity in this place now." "You have equity?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sweat equity," Sabrina explained. "It's a legal concept. When tenants make substantial improvements to a property and establish long-term residency, they develop ownership rights. Adverse possession, it's called." I'd never heard of such a thing, but they spoke with such confidence that I began to doubt myself. Maybe there were laws I didn't understand. Maybe the world had changed in ways I hadn't kept up with. They were educated, tech-savvy, connected to modern legal and business concepts that had passed me by. That doubt was exactly what they were counting on. By the 7th month, they'd stopped asking permission for anything. They painted the living room a dark charcoal color that made the space feel like a cave, covering the warm cream walls Benjamin and I had chosen together. They replaced the front door lock, claiming the old one was insecure, and gave me a new key, like they were doing me a favor. They invited friends over for dinner parties without mentioning it to me first, and when I encountered strangers in my kitchen, they'd introduce me as Dorothy, the original owner, as if I was a quaint relic from the house's past, rather than the person whose name was on the deed. When I tried to object to any of these changes, they'd exchange those same knowing looks.
Mrs. Caldwell, Sabrina would say, I think you might be getting a little confused about how things work now. This isn't 1950. Property relationships are more collaborative these days. Maybe you should talk to someone about these concerns, Garrett would add. Sometimes when people get older, they have trouble adapting to change. It's perfectly normal, but it might be worth having a professional help you work through these feelings. The implication was clear. If I continued to resist their authority, they'd claim I was mentally incompetent. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. Without their rent payments, I was struggling to cover the mortgage, utilities, and property taxes. I'd already dipped into my small savings account twice to avoid late fees. My credit cards were creeping toward their limits as I tried to maintain the household expenses they'd promised to help me with. When I mentioned that I might need to find new tenants who could actually pay rent, Garrett's expression turned cold. That would be very unwise, Mrs. Caldwell. We have established tenancy rights here. You can't just kick us out because you don't understand modern housing arrangements. If you try to evict us, we'll have to explore legal options to protect our interests. Legal options? The words sent a chill through me. Tenant protection laws? Adverse possession claims? Elder abuse investigations? Sabrina listed off casually. There are lots of ways this could go if you force us to defend ourselves. I didn't understand what adverse possession meant, but elder abuse investigations sounded terrifying. Were they threatening to claim I was abusing them, or that someone was abusing me? Either way, it sounded like trouble I couldn't afford. The threat worked. Instead of fighting them, instead of calling a lawyer or the police, I chose to try to appease them. When they claimed I owed them money for improvements they'd made without permission, I actually considered paying them. When they said they needed help with their business expenses and would pay me back with interest, I believed them. That's how I found myself on a Tuesday morning in October, standing in line at First National Bank of Millbrook Heights, filling out a withdrawal slip for $1,600 from Benjamin's life insurance account. The mortgage company had sent a late notice, and I was terrified of losing the house Benjamin and I had worked so hard to pay for. The teller, a young woman named Ashley Brennan, who'd helped me before, looked concerned when she processed the withdrawal. Mrs. Caldwell, is everything all right? You've been making some large withdrawals lately. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I was embarrassed. How could I explain that I was paying rent for people who lived in my own house? How could I admit that I'd lost control of my own life so completely? Everything's fine, dear, I lied. Just some household expenses. Ashley's eyes showed doubt, but she completed the transaction. As she handed me the cash, she said quietly, Mrs. Caldwell, if you ever need help with anything, or if someone is pressuring you about money, you can always come talk to us. We have resources to help you. Her words followed me to the car, but pride kept me from turning around and accepting her offer. I was Dorothy Caldwell, former librarian, widow, homeowner. I should be able to handle my own problems. After I made the rent payment online, transferring money to keep my mortgage current, I drove home feeling exhausted and defeated. Maybe Garrett and Sabrina were right. Maybe I was too old to understand how things work now. Maybe I should be grateful to have young people helping me manage things, even if I didn't always understand their methods. That illusion shattered the moment I walked through my front door. Taped to the hallway mirror was an envelope with my name written in Sabrina's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper that would change everything I thought I knew about the people I'd welcomed into my home. The letter was typed on official-looking letterhead that read, Vance Chen Property Management, LLC. It was addressed to former homeowner Dorothy Caldwell and dated that morning, while I'd been at the bank paying their obligations with my own money. Dear Ms. Caldwell, we are writing to inform you that Garrett Vance and Sabrina Chen are hereby asserting legal ownership of the property located at 1247 Magnolia Street, Millbrook Heights, under adverse possession statutes and tenant equity laws. My hands started shaking as I continued reading.
7 months ago. Maybe 8 now. And they've been paying rent? Well, they were at first, but then they said they were contributing to the house in other ways. And, Mom, have you been taking your medications regularly? The question hit me like a slap. My medications? Rachel, I take a blood pressure pill and a vitamin. I'm not on anything that would affect my thinking. I know. I'm just worried about you living alone in that big house. Maybe we should talk about you moving closer to David and me. Portland has some really nice senior communities. Senior communities? My own daughter was suggesting the same thing Garrett and Sabrina had written in their letter. Rachel, you're not listening to me. These people are trying to steal my house. Mom, that's not really possible. You own the house outright, right? You have the deed. Yes, but they're claiming something called adverse possession. There was a pause. Mom, adverse possession takes years to establish, and it requires very specific circumstances. It sounds like these tenants are maybe just difficult, and you're feeling overwhelmed. Why don't I call you back this weekend when David's home, and we could all talk about this together? After I hung up, I sat in the den staring at the phone. Even my own daughter thought I was confused, possibly losing my mental faculties. If Rachel, who loved me and knew me better than anyone, could dismiss my concerns so easily, how would strangers react? Friday morning brought a new humiliation. I was in the kitchen making oatmeal when Garrett came downstairs, dressed in a business suit, carrying a briefcase. "Morning, Dorothy," he said, not bothering with the respectful Mrs. Caldwell he'd used for months. "I'm meeting with our lawyer today to finalize the property transfer paperwork. Is there anything you want me to tell him?" The casualness of it took my breath away. He was discussing stealing my house, like he was asking about the weather. "This is insane," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just take someone's house because you lived in it for a few months." Garrett poured himself coffee using the mug that had been Benjamin's favorite, a blue ceramic piece with "World's Best Dad" that Rachel had made in 3rd grade. Seeing him drink from it made my chest tighten with rage. "Dorothy, we've gone through this. We've established residency, made substantial improvements, and taken over property management responsibilities. The law is pretty clear about adverse possession in cases like this." "What improvements?" I demanded. "You painted my living room without permission and threw away my plants." "We upgraded the security system, modernized the landscaping, improved the Wi-Fi infrastructure, optimized the energy efficiency. We have documented everything." Sabrina appeared in the doorway, also dressed professionally. She carried a folder thick with papers. "Good morning, Dorothy. I hope you slept well." Her tone was sickeningly sweet, like she was humoring a child. "Garrett and I are going to get the legal paperwork started today. We really hope you'll be reasonable about this transition." "You're thieves," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "You're stealing my home." Sabrina's expression hardened. "Dorothy, we're trying to handle this civilly, but if you continue with these accusations, we'll have to consider legal action for harassment and defamation." "Defamation? I'm telling the truth." "Are you?" Garrett set down the coffee mug with deliberate care. "Because from where we stand, it looks like you're an elderly woman who got confused about a business arrangement and is now having trouble accepting reality." "We have witnesses," Sabrina added. "The mail carrier, the furnace repairman, your neighbor, Mrs. Hartley. They all know we've been managing this property. They've seen you getting confused about basic things." "My neighbor Constance? What about Mrs. Hartley?" "She mentioned to me just yesterday how worried she is about you," Sabrina said with fake concern. "She said you've been acting strangely lately, forgetting conversations, getting confused about simple things. She thinks you might need some help." I felt the walls closing in around me. Constance had suggested I rent out rooms in the first place. Had she been part of this somehow? Or had Garrett and Sabrina manipulated her the same way they'd manipulated everyone else? "This is impossible," I whispered. "What's impossible is you continuing to live in denial.
Garrett said, checking his expensive watch. "We need to go, but Dorothy, I really encourage you to think seriously about your options here. Fighting this will only make things harder for everyone." They left through the front door like they owned the place, and I heard Garrett's car, a sleek black sedan that had appeared in my driveway a few weeks ago, pull away. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the life Benjamin and I had built together, and felt more alone than I had ever had, even in the months after Benjamin's death. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The folder Sabrina had been carrying was sitting on the counter. She'd left it behind, either by accident or on purpose. Inside were documents that revealed the true scope of their scheme. The first page was a timeline, meticulously planned, starting from 3 months before they'd even contacted me about renting rooms. It showed that they'd been researching my property, my financial situation, and my personal circumstances. They knew Benjamin had died. They knew Rachel lived across the country. They knew I was struggling with expenses.
The second page was a character profile of me, written like I was a target in some kind of con game. Isolated widow, limited family support, financial stress, trusting nature, conflict-avoidant personality. Below that were notes about my vulnerabilities, needs companionship, fears being a burden to daughter, pride prevents asking for help, easily manipulated through guilt and confusion. But the third page was what made me sick to my stomach. It was a property assessment showing my house was worth $340,000 in the current market. Below that were notes about comparable properties and rental income potential. They hadn't just been planning to steal my house, they'd been planning to use it as an investment property. The fourth page outlined their strategy in clinical detail. Phase 1. Establish trust and dependency, months 1 to 2. Phase 2. Create financial obligation and confusion, months 3 to 4. Phase 3. Escalate control and isolation, months 5 to 6. Phase 4. Legal intimidation and possession claim, month 7. Phase 5. Competency challenge and forced transfer, month 8-9. I was currently in Phase 4, with Phase 5 scheduled to begin within the week. The final pages were even more disturbing. They contained research about elder abuse laws, adverse possession statutes, and competency hearings. They'd studied exactly how to manipulate the legal system to steal from elderly homeowners. But the most chilling discovery was a list of other targets. 5 other properties in the area with similar profiles. Elderly widow, Margaret Thompson, 1847 Oak Street. Retired widower, Harold Kim, 923 Pine Avenue. They weren't just running this scam on me. They were part of a systematic operation targeting vulnerable seniors. I photocopied every page at the copy machine Benjamin had bought for his home office, my hand shaking so badly I could barely operate it. Then I put the original folder back exactly where Sabrina had left it. When they returned that afternoon, I was sitting calmly in the living room reading a book. "How did your meeting go?" I asked with false pleasantness. "Very well," Sabrina said, retrieving her folder. "The lawyer confirmed everything we discussed. The paperwork should be ready by Monday." "That's nice," I said, turning a page in my book like I didn't have a care in the world. I saw them exchange glances. They expected me to be upset, argumentative, confused. My calm acceptance clearly bothered them. That evening, I made the most important call of my life. "Millbrook Heights Police Department, Officer Martinez speaking." "Hello, I need to report a crime in progress. My name is Dorothy Caldwell, and I have evidence that 2 people are attempting to steal my house through fraud and elder abuse." "Ma'am, can you tell me more about this situation?" For the first time in months, I felt like someone was actually listening to me. Officer Martinez took detailed notes as I explained the timeline, the manipulation tactics, and the documents I'd discovered. Mrs. Caldwell, what you're describing sounds like a sophisticated fraud operation. We've been seeing more of these lately. Criminals targeting elderly homeowners with isolation and financial pressure tactics. Can you come in tomorrow to file a formal report? Yes, absolutely. And Mrs. Caldwell, don't let them know you're aware of their plan. Keep acting normal until we can build a case. Saturday morning, Garrett and Sabrina announced they were going out of town for the weekend to visit Sabrina's family. I watched their car disappear down Magnolia Street, then immediately called a locksmith. I need all the locks changed on my house, I told him, today. Lady, that's going to be expensive for a Saturday emergency call. I don't care what it costs. While the locksmith worked, I called a lawyer. The first 3 attorneys I reached had answering services, but the fourth, Margaret Fitzgerald from Fitzgerald & Associates, answered her personal cell phone. Mrs. Caldwell, what you're describing is criminal fraud, not just a civil dispute. Have you contacted the police? I'm filing a report Monday morning. Good. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Take photos of any changes they've made to your property, gather all your original ownership documents, and whatever you do, don't sign anything they give you. I have copies of their planning documents. They left them behind by accident. They left their planning documents? Margaret's voice sharpened with interest. Mrs. Caldwell, that could be exactly what we need to shut this down quickly. By Sunday evening, I had new locks, a security camera system, and an attorney on retainer. I'd also done something else that would have surprised Garrett and Sabrina if they'd known about it. I'd called the other elderly homeowners on their target list. Margaret Thompson at 1847 Oak Street answered on the 3rd ring. Mrs. Thompson, my name is Dorothy Caldwell. I think some people might be planning to target you with a rental scam. Oh my goodness! How did you know? These lovely young people contacted me last week about renting rooms. They seemed so nice, so professional. Don't let them into your house, I said urgently. It's a fraud operation designed to steal your property. One by one, I called the other names on the list. Harold Kim had already been contacted by people matching Garrett and Sabrina's description. Eleanor Vance at 1523 Maple Drive had actually met with them the week before. They seemed so knowledgeable about property management. They said they could help me generate income from my empty bedrooms. It's a scam, I explained. They're trying to steal houses from elderly homeowners. By Sunday night, I'd created a network of informed, prepared neighbors who knew what to watch for. Margaret Thompson had already contacted her lawyer. Harold Kim had called his adult children to warn them about the scam. When Garrett and Sabrina returned Sunday evening, I was ready for them.
They used their keys to try to enter through the front door, but the new lock stopped them cold. I watched through the window as they stood on the porch, looking confused and angry. Garrett pounded on the door. Dorothy, what's going on? Why don't our keys work? I opened the door just enough to speak through the chain lock I'd installed. I had the locks changed for security reasons, I said calmly. Security reasons? Sabrina's voice was shrill. We live here. You can't lock us out of our own home. Your home? I let surprise color my voice. This is my house. Your tenants. And tenants who haven't paid rent in months. We've been through this, Dorothy, Garrett said, his patience clearly strained. We have equity in this property. You can't just change the locks. Actually, I can. I checked with my lawyer, and landlords have the right to change locks for security purposes as long as they provide new keys to paying tenants. We're paying tenants, Sabrina snapped. Really? When was your last rent payment? They looked at each other, and I could see them recalculating. They'd gotten so confident in their scheme that they'd forgotten to maintain even the pretense of being legitimate tenants. We'll call the police, Garrett threatened.
Please do. I'd love to discuss the situation with them. That clearly wasn't the response they'd expected. After a few more minutes of threats and demands, they retreated to Garrett's car to make phone calls. I watched from the window as they had what looked like a heated argument. Finally, they drove away, presumably to find a hotel. Monday morning, I was at the Millbrook Heights Police Department when it opened at 8 a.m. Officer Martinez introduced me to Detective Sarah Chen, no relation to Sabrina, thankfully, who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly. Mrs. Caldwell, this is one of the most sophisticated operations I've seen, Detective Chen said, as she reviewed the copied documents. These people have been planning this for months. The fact that they have multiple targets suggests this isn't their first time. What happens now? We're going to build a case for fraud, attempted theft, and elder abuse. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. When criminals realize their scheme is falling apart, they sometimes become desperate. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Sabrina. Dorothy, we need to talk. This whole misunderstanding has gotten out of hand. There's no misunderstanding, I said, gesturing for Detective Chen to listen in. Dorothy, we're prepared to be reasonable about this. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone. What kind of arrangement? Well, we've invested a lot of time and money into your property. Maybe we could purchase it from you at a fair price. It would solve your financial problems and give you the resources to move somewhere more appropriate for your needs. I almost laughed. Even now, caught in their lies, they were still trying to manipulate me. I'm not interested in selling my house, I said firmly. Dorothy, be reasonable. You're an elderly woman living alone in a house that's too big for you. We're offering you a way out that preserves your dignity. My dignity? Yes, rather than having this become a messy legal battle where your mental competency gets questioned in court. Detective Chen's eyebrows shot up. She gestured for me to keep Sabrina talking. Are you threatening me, Sabrina? I'm trying to help you understand reality. You're 70 years old, living alone, clearly struggling with finances and property management. A court might decide you need assistance making these kinds of decisions. And you think you should be the ones to help me? We're young, educated, financially stable. We understand real estate and property law. We'd be much better positioned to manage the property than someone in your situation. Detective Chen was writing furiously, documenting every word. I'll think about it, I said finally. Good. We'll come by this evening to discuss the details. After I hung up, Detective Chen looked at me with respect. Mrs. Caldwell, you've just given us everything we need. They're on record threatening to challenge your mental competency if you don't sell them your house. That's textbook elder abuse. What happens when they come by tonight? They won't make it that far. We're picking them up this afternoon. But Garrett and Sabrina were smarter than we gave them credit for. When the police went to arrest them at the hotel they'd been staying, they were gone. The desk clerk said they'd checked out early that morning. Their car was found abandoned at the airport, but by then, they were long gone. Detective Chen called me that evening with the disappointing news. The good news is your house is safe. We've documented their attempted fraud, and there's no way any court would honor their possession claims now. The bad news is they've probably moved on to their next target. What about the other elderly homeowners they were targeting? We've contacted all of them with warnings, and we've issued warrants for Garrett Vance and Sabrina Chen, though those probably aren't their real names. As I hung up the phone, I realized something important. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was someone who had fought back and won. Tuesday morning, Margaret Thompson called me. Dorothy, I can't thank you enough for warning me. Those same people showed up at my door yesterday, but I was ready for them. I told them I knew all about their scam and that the police were looking for them. What did they do?
They left so fast, they left tire marks on my driveway. Over the next few days, I heard similar stories from the other homeowners on their list. Eleanor Vance had contacted them about renting rooms, but when they arrived for their appointment, she'd had her son and a police officer waiting. Harold Kim had gone one step further. He'd set up a fake meeting and helped police try to arrest them, but they'd spotted the surveillance and escaped. "You saved all of us," Harold told me when he called to thank me. "If you hadn't figured out their scheme and warned us, they might have succeeded in stealing multiple homes." A week later, I was back in my house, living alone but no longer lonely. The experience had connected me with a network of neighbors I'd never really known before. Margaret Thompson and I had coffee every Thursday. Harold Kim helped me set up better home security. Eleanor Vance and I started a neighborhood watch group specifically focused on protecting elderly residents from scams. But the most important call came from my daughter, Rachel. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Detective Chen called me and explained what really happened. I should have believed you from the beginning." "It's okay, sweetheart. Even I had trouble believing it was real." "No, it's not okay. You were under attack, and instead of helping you, I suggested you might need assisted living. I'm so sorry." "Rachel, you couldn't have known. These people were professionals. They'd done this before." "I'm flying out next weekend. I want to see you, and I want to make sure you have better support systems in place." After we hung up, I walked through my house, fully mine again, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Garrett and Sabrina had tried to steal more than just my property. They tried to steal my confidence, my independence, my sense of reality itself. They'd almost succeeded. But in the end, they'd underestimated something fundamental about me. I wasn't just a vulnerable elderly woman living alone. I was Dorothy Caldwell, and I was stronger than they'd imagined. 2 weeks after Garrett and Sabrina fled Millbrook Heights, I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong. What I discovered next would shake my faith in everything I thought I knew about justice, truth, and the people I trusted most. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in November. I was in the kitchen, finally feeling comfortable in my own home again, when the phone rang. "Mrs. Caldwell, this is attorney James Wickham from Wickham, Barnes & Associates. I represent Mr. Garrett and Miss Sabrina Chen. I understand there's been some confusion regarding their tenancy at your property." My blood went cold. Confusion? They tried to steal my house. "Mrs. Caldwell, my clients have asked me to reach out because they're concerned about your welfare. They've informed me that you may be experiencing some cognitive difficulties that led to this unfortunate misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding. They're criminals who fled when the police tried to arrest them." "Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, my clients left town because they felt threatened and unsafe. They're prepared to return to resolve this matter legally, but they wanted to ensure your family was aware of their concerns about your mental state." The words hit me like ice water. "My family?" "Yes, we've been in contact with your daughter, Rachel. She's quite concerned about you living alone and managing your affairs independently." Before I could respond, he continued, "Mrs. Caldwell, we'd like to propose a meeting with all parties present, yourself, your daughter, my clients, and perhaps a medical professional who can assess the situation objectively." I hung up on him, my hands shaking. How had they contacted Rachel? How did they even know how to reach her? 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Rachel. "Mom, I just got the strangest call from a lawyer. He said those tenants of yours are worried about your mental health." "Rachel, don't listen to them. They're part of the scam." "But Mom, he knew specific details about our conversations. He said you've been acting paranoid, accusing people of trying to steal your house, changing locks without reason. He made it sound like you might be having some kind of breakdown." "I am not having a breakdown!" My voice came out louder than I intended. "These people documented their plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. I have proof."
Mom, calm down. You're getting upset again, just like you did when you called me about the adverse possession thing. That was real, Rachel. The police confirmed it was real. I know, but this lawyer seemed very professional. He said his clients are willing to drop all claims to the house if we can just get you some help. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Even after fleeing from police, Garrett and Sabrina were still working their con, now using my own daughter as their weapon. Rachel, listen to me very carefully. These people are criminals. They had detailed plans to steal my house and 4 others in the neighborhood. The police have warrants out for their arrest. Then why would they have a lawyer calling about resolving things peacefully? It was a good question, and I didn't have a good answer. That afternoon, I called Detective Chen. Mrs. Caldwell, we're aware of James Wickham. He's a real attorney, but he has a reputation for representing questionable clients. The fact that he's involved suggests Vance and Chen have more resources than we initially thought. He contacted my daughter. He's trying to convince her I'm mentally unstable.
Could those documents have been something else that you misinterpreted? Legal research for a legitimate purpose, perhaps? I realized that even showing her the evidence wouldn't matter. Sabrina and Garrett had been too clever. They created a situation where any attempt to defend myself would be seen as further proof of my instability. Thursday evening, Rachel called. "Mom? I spoke with Dr. Manning. She said you seem stressed and isolated, but she's concerned about these accusations you're making. She thinks you might benefit from some additional support." "Rachel, she doesn't believe me about the fraud." "Mom, think about this logically. If these people were really criminals trying to steal your house, why would they hire a lawyer to try to resolve things peacefully? Why would they be concerned about your welfare?" "Because they're still running their con. They're just using a different approach now." Or maybe they were just difficult tenants, and this whole situation got blown out of proportion in your mind. I could hear the doubt in Rachel's voice. My own daughter was starting to believe I'd imagined the entire thing. Friday morning brought the worst news yet. Detective Chen called with an update that shattered what little faith I had left in the system. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have some disappointing news. The district attorney's office has decided not to pursue charges against Vance and Chen." "Why not?" "Several factors. First, they've hired a good lawyer who's challenging the validity of the evidence. Second, some of the witnesses we interviewed have given statements that contradict your account of events." "What witnesses?" "Your neighbor, Mrs. Hartley, said she never saw any evidence of fraudulent behavior, only normal tenant-landlord disputes. The repair technician said Garrett Vance seemed like a helpful family member, not someone trying to steal property. Even the bank teller you mentioned expressed concerns about your mental state rather than confirming financial abuse." I felt the world tilting around me. "Detective Chen, you saw their planning documents yourself." "Yes, but their lawyer is claiming those were legitimate business documents for a property management consulting service. Without other corroborating evidence, it's difficult to prove criminal intent." "So they get away with it?" "I'm afraid so. However, their civil claim to your property has been permanently dismissed, so your house is safe." After I hung up, I sat in Benjamin's chair and tried to process what had happened. Garrett and Sabrina hadn't just tried to steal my house, they'd stolen my credibility, my relationships, and my peace of mind. Even worse, they'd done it so skillfully that everyone around me now doubted my version of events. That weekend, things got even worse. Rachel flew in from Portland, but instead of the supportive visit I'd hoped for, she came with an agenda. "Mom, I've been thinking about your situation, and I'm really worried about you living alone in this big house. Maybe it's time to consider some alternatives." "Alternatives like what?" "There's a beautiful senior community in Portland, just 20 minutes from David and me. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be people around, activities, support if you need it."
Rachel, you're talking about putting me in a home. It's not a home, Mom. It's independent living with support services. You'd have your own space, your own life, but with built-in community and help when you need it. I don't need help. I've been managing fine on my own. Have you? Mom, this whole situation with the tenants has been so stressful for you. And now you're making these serious accusations against people who seem to be genuinely concerned about your welfare. Rachel, please listen to me. I know how this sounds, but these people are dangerous. They've manipulated everyone around me, including you. Mom, that's exactly what Dr. Manning was worried about. You're so convinced that everyone is against you, that there's some kind of conspiracy. That's not healthy thinking. I realized that arguing would only make things worse. In Rachel's mind, my insistence on the truth had become evidence of my mental decline. Sunday evening, after Rachel left, I was alone in my house again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of complete isolation. Everyone I trusted had been turned against me. My neighbor thought I was paranoid. My daughter thought I needed institutional care. The police had dropped the case. Even the psychiatrist believed I'd misinterpreted events. Garrett and Sabrina had accomplished something far more devastating than stealing my house. They'd stolen my reality. Monday morning, I received one final insult. A letter arrived from James Wickham, the attorney representing my former tenants. Dear Mrs. Caldwell, my clients remain concerned about your welfare and the misunderstandings that occurred during their tenancy. They would like to propose a resolution that serves everyone's best interests. They are prepared to waive any claims related to their tenancy in exchange for your agreement to seek ongoing mental health support. They believe this would provide you with the help you need while preventing any future misunderstandings. Please consider this generous offer carefully. The letter was a masterpiece of manipulation. On the surface, it looked like concerned former tenants offering to drop their claims in exchange for me getting help. In reality, it was a final attempt to get me to admit I was mentally unstable. I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash. Then I sat down and made a decision that would change everything. If everyone wanted to believe I was a confused old woman who'd imagined the whole thing, I'd let them. I would stop trying to convince people of the truth. I would stop fighting the narrative they'd created about me. But I wouldn't stop fighting them. While everyone was distracted by their successful character assassination, I would use their confidence against them. They thought they'd neutralized me by destroying my credibility. They thought I was defeated. They were about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is one who has nothing left to lose. Tuesday morning, I called Margaret Thompson, one of the other homeowners Garrett and Sabrina had targeted. Margaret, it's Dorothy Caldwell. I need your help with something, but it needs to stay between us. Of course, dear. What's going on? Everyone thinks I'm crazy. The police dropped the case, my daughter wants to put me in assisted living, and my neighbors think I imagined the whole fraud. But I know these people are still out there, and they're going to try this again. Dorothy, that's terrible. What can I do? I need you to help me catch them in the act. How? By giving them exactly what they want, another elderly victim who looks easy to manipulate. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. You want me to pretend to be a target? I want you to be bait, with one crucial difference. This time, we'll be ready for them. It was a dangerous plan, but it was the only way I could think of to expose the truth. If no one would believe my story, I'd create a new story that would be impossible to deny. The hunt was about to begin, and this time, I wouldn't be the prey. Margaret Thompson proved to be a better conspirator than I'd ever imagined. When I explained my plan to use her as bait to catch Garrett and Sabrina, she didn't hesitate for a moment. Dorothy, those people tried to destroy your life. If there's a chance they're still out there targeting other seniors, we have to stop them.
We met at Margaret's house on Oak Street the next morning to plan our strategy. Her home was similar to mine, a well-maintained older property in a desirable neighborhood, exactly the type Garrett and Sabrina seemed to prefer. The key is making me look vulnerable without appearing suspicious, Margaret said as we sat in her living room. They're going to be more careful now that they know you exposed their first operation. That's actually an advantage, I realized. They'll think I'm discredited. Everyone believes I imagined the whole thing, so they might feel safe operating in the same area again. Over the next week, Margaret began setting the stage. She posted on local Facebook groups about feeling lonely in her big house and considering renting out rooms for companionship and extra income. She mentioned recent financial concerns. Her property taxes had gone up and her fixed income wasn't stretching as far as it used to. I helped her craft the posts to include all the vulnerability markers Garrett and Sabrina looked for: recent widowhood, adult children living far away, financial stress, social isolation, and most importantly, a trusting nature that wanted to see the best in people. I just hate this empty house since Walter passed, Margaret posted in the Millbrook Heights community group. Maybe having some nice young people around would help with both the loneliness and the bills. Has anyone had good experiences renting rooms to younger tenants? I want to be careful, but not overly suspicious. Walter always said I was too trusting for my own good. The response was immediate and telling. Several community members shared their own experiences with tenants, but 3 private messages stood out. 2 were obvious scammers using fake profiles, but the 3rd made my blood run cold. It was from someone named Sarah Mitchell, with a profile showing a professional-looking woman in her early 30s. The message was perfectly crafted, friendly but not overeager, professional but warm, with just enough personal detail to seem genuine. Hi, Margaret. I saw your post about renting rooms and wanted to reach out. My partner and I are both professionals looking for a quiet place to stay while we save for our own home. We're clean, responsible, and would love to help with household tasks or maintenance. We've actually had wonderful experiences living with older homeowners. There's so much wisdom and warmth in established homes. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee to discuss the possibility? Margaret showed me the message, and I felt that familiar chill of recognition. The language patterns, the subtle flattery, the emphasis on helping with household tasks. It was too similar to Garrett and Sabrina's original approach to be coincidental. It's them, I said with certainty. Different names, probably different appearance, but it's definitely them. How can you be sure? I pulled out the folder of documents I'd copied from their original planning materials. Look at this phrase, wisdom and warmth in established homes. It's identical to language they used in their research notes about targeting elderly homeowners. They're using the same script. Margaret agreed to respond, but we knew we had to be extremely careful. If they suspected a trap, they'd disappear again. We needed to document everything while appearing completely naive. Sarah, thank you for reaching out. I'd love to meet for coffee. Would tomorrow afternoon work? There's a lovely cafe called Rosewood on Main Street. I'll be the older lady with silver hair, probably looking a bit nervous. I haven't done this before. The response came within an hour, confirming the meeting, and included more subtle manipulation tactics. Sarah mentioned that she and her partner were especially drawn to homeowners who valued family and tradition, and she hoped they could become like extended family to Margaret.
Family. The same emotional manipulation they'd used on me. That evening, I called Harold Kim, another homeowner from their original target list who had become part of our informal network. Harold, I think they're back. Different names, but the same operation. What do you need me to do? Can you be at Rosewood Cafe tomorrow afternoon, maybe reading a newspaper at a corner table? I want witnesses who can identify them if this goes badly. Harold had retired from a career in corporate security and understood surveillance better than any of us. I'll be there. Should I bring backup? Let's see what we're dealing with first. If it really is them, we'll need to be smarter about how we catch them this time. Wednesday afternoon, I positioned myself across the street from Rosewood Cafe with a pair of binoculars, feeling like a character in a spy novel. Margaret was inside, sitting at a window table where I could see her clearly.
Harold was in the corner with his newspaper looking like any other retiree enjoying his afternoon coffee. At exactly 2 p.m., 2 people approached the cafe entrance. My heart stopped. It was absolutely Garrett and Sabrina, but they'd completely transformed their appearance. Garrett had dyed his hair blonde and grown a beard. He wore glasses and had somehow made himself look heavier. Sabrina had cut her long black hair into a short auburn bob and dressed in a more conservative style than before. But I knew their body language, their way of moving together, the confident stride that said they owned whatever space they entered. These were the same people who had tried to steal my house and destroy my life. I watched through the window as they approached Margaret's table. Even from across the street, I could see their performance beginning. The warm smiles, the respectful handshakes, the careful attention to Margaret's every word. They were playing the roles of Sarah and Michael Mitchell, concerned young professionals looking for a stable living situation. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. It's definitely them. Same vocal patterns, same manipulation techniques. The woman is already complimenting Margaret's jewelry and asking about family photos. Margaret played her part perfectly. I could see her showing them pictures on her phone. Probably photos of her late husband Walter and her children in California. She looked animated, engaged, clearly enjoying the attention from these charming young people who seemed so interested in her life. After 45 minutes, they all shook hands again, and I watched Garrett and Sabrina leave the cafe. They walked to a silver Toyota Camry with rental car plates. They'd learned from their mistake of using Garrett's personal vehicle. Margaret stayed in the cafe for another 10 minutes, then came out and walked slowly home, giving no indication that anything unusual had happened. I met her in her kitchen 20 minutes later. How'd it go? They're smooth, I'll give them that. They spent most of the time asking about my background, my family situation, my financial needs. They're calling themselves Sarah and Michael Mitchell now, and they claim to work in marketing and graphic design. Same professions as before, just gender swapped. They asked very specific questions about my property taxes, my mortgage situation, whether I had any adult children nearby. When I mentioned that my kids live in California and only visit twice a year, I saw them exchange a quick glance. Did they seem suspicious of you? Not at all. I think I convinced them I'm exactly the kind of target they're looking for. Lonely, financially stressed, and eager for companionship. They're coming to see the house on Friday. Harold joined us that evening to plan the next phase. As a former security professional, he understood the legal requirements for documenting criminal activity. We need audio and video evidence of them attempting fraud. Just witnessing their behavior won't be enough, especially given how they discredited Dorothy's testimony before. How do we get that evidence without them knowing? Hidden cameras, recording devices, and very careful planning. Margaret, when they come to see your house, you need to get them to reveal their true intentions on camera. What if they don't? What if they've learned to be more careful? They won't be able to resist, I said with grim certainty. Their egos are too big. Once they think they have another easy target, they'll start revealing their real plan. We spent Thursdays setting up Margaret's house like a movie set. Harold installed tiny cameras in the living room and kitchen, hidden so well that even I couldn't spot them once he was finished. We placed audio recording devices in strategic locations and ensured Margaret had a panic button she could press if things went wrong. Remember, Harold told Margaret, your job is to seem interested, but ask questions that will make them reveal their scheme. Ask about lease terms, about improvements they might make, about their experience with other landlords. Give them opportunities to slip up.
At 3 p.m. sharp, the silver Camry pulled into Margaret's driveway. I watched on the tablet as Garrett and Sabrina, still calling themselves Michael and Sarah, approached the front door. Margaret answered wearing the perfect outfit for her role, a slightly outdated dress that suggested financial constraints, practical shoes, and jewelry that looked valuable but not expensive. She looked exactly like what they were searching for, a well-meaning elderly woman with assets but limited sophistication about protecting them. Sarah, Michael, welcome. Please come in. I'm so excited to show you the house. The tour began in the living room where the main camera captured everything.
I watched them examine the space with the predatory assessment I remembered so well, noting the quality of the furniture, the artwork, the small details that revealed Margaret's financial status. "This is a beautiful home," Sabrina said in her disguised voice. "You can tell it's been lovingly maintained." "Thank you, dear. My husband Walter and I lived here for 38 years. He passed 2 years ago, and it's been so quiet since then." "I'm sorry for your loss," Garrett replied with practiced sympathy. "It must be difficult managing such a large property on your own." And there it was, the same opening gambit they had used on me. Sympathy, followed by the suggestion that managing property alone was too difficult for an elderly woman. Margaret played along perfectly. "Oh, it is challenging. The property taxes alone have nearly doubled in the past 5 years. I'm managing for now, but I worry about unexpected expenses." I saw them exchange that same quick glance I'd noticed at the cafe. In their minds, Margaret had just confirmed she was financially vulnerable. "Well, that's exactly why our arrangement could benefit everyone," Sabrina said. "We're not just looking for a place to rent. We're looking for a partnership." "Partnership?" Margaret asked with exactly the right tone of confused interest. "We believe in building equity together. Rather than just paying rent and getting nothing in return, we prefer arrangements where our contributions help improve the property value." There it was, the same sweat equity nonsense they had used to justify not paying me rent. I watched Margaret nod thoughtfully, as if this made perfect sense. "That sounds wonderful, but I'm not sure I understand how it would work." "Well, for example, instead of paying full rent every month, we might pay a reduced amount plus invest in property improvements. New appliances, landscaping, maybe some modernization projects that would increase your home's value. And of course," Garrett added, "we'd help with property management tasks. Dealing with repair people, handling maintenance issues, managing bills and paperwork. It can be overwhelming for someone your age to handle all of that alone." Someone your age. The condescension was exactly the same. Margaret asked the crucial question. "But wouldn't those improvements belong to me since it's my house?" Garrett's smile became slightly predatory. "Well, that's where the partnership aspect comes in. When tenants make substantial investments in a property, especially when they're helping with management responsibilities, they develop what's called equity interest. It's a modern approach that recognizes the value of the contributions both parties make." I felt my pulse accelerate. They were laying out their scheme exactly as they had with me, but this time it was being recorded from multiple angles. "I'm not sure I understand the legal aspects," Margaret said with perfect, innocent confusion. "Oh, don't worry about the legal details. We handle all of that. The important thing is that we're building something together that benefits everyone." They spent the next hour touring the house, and with each room, their commentary became more revealing. They discussed which walls might be removed to improve flow, which fixtures needed updating, and which furniture might be repositioned for better energy. In the kitchen, Garrett made a comment that sent chills down my spine. "This layout has real potential. With some strategic renovations, this could easily be worth 40 or 50,000 more than it is now." "Really?" Margaret asked. "That much?" "Oh, absolutely," Sabrina confirmed. "We've helped other homeowners realize significant value increases through smart improvements. Of course, once we've invested that much in improvements, it becomes more of a joint ownership situation." Joint ownership. They'd said it out loud, on camera, with crystal clear audio quality. Margaret played her final card beautifully. "Well, this all sounds very exciting, but I'd want everything properly documented. I'm sure you understand an old lady has to be careful about legal matters." "Of course," Garrett said smoothly, "though we find that too much paperwork can sometimes slow down beneficial arrangements. The most successful partnerships we've had have been based on trust and mutual respect rather than complicated legal documents." Translation: they didn't want any documentation that could be used against them later. After they left, I practically ran to Margaret's house. Harold was already there, downloading the video files and checking the audio quality.
Did we get everything? I asked. Everything and more, Harold grinned. They just confessed to attempted fraud on multiple cameras with crystal clear audio. They described their entire scheme, the false partnership claims, the equity fraud, the gradual takeover strategy. What now?
Now we take this to the police, the district attorney, and anyone else who will listen. This time, they can't claim it was a misunderstanding. But Margaret looked troubled. There's something else. When they were leaving, Sabrina, mentioned that they'd worked with several other homeowners in the area who had been very satisfied with their arrangement. She specifically mentioned a Mrs. Patterson on Magnolia Street. My blood went cold. That's my address. They're still using my case as a reference, even after everything that happened. Which means they're probably telling other potential victims that their scheme worked with you, that you were happy with the arrangement, Harold realized. We need to warn anyone else they might be targeting, I said. And we need to get this evidence to authorities before they can manipulate another victim. But as I looked at the clear video evidence of their fraud attempt, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. This time we had them. This time there would be consequences. This time I wouldn't be the only one telling the truth. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a long struggle finally reaches its conclusion. I sat in my kitchen at 6 a.m., watching the sunrise through the window where I'd eaten breakfast with Benjamin for 47 years and felt something I hadn't experienced in months, absolute certainty about what came next. Harold arrived at 7 a.m. with a briefcase full of evidence and a grim smile. I've reviewed all the footage from Friday. Dorothy, this is airtight. They confessed to everything on camera. Margaret joined us 10 minutes later, looking nervous but determined. Are we really going to end this today? We're going to try. But first, we need to make sure this evidence gets to the right people in the right way. Our first stop was the Millbrook Heights Police Department. Detective Chen looked surprised to see me walk in with Harold and Margaret, especially since she'd told me the case was closed. Mrs. Caldwell, I wasn't expecting to see you again. Is everything all right? Detective Chen, I have new evidence that Garrett Vance and Sabrina Chen are still operating their fraud scheme in this area. They attempted to target my friend Margaret Thompson last Friday. Detective Chen's expression shifted from polite dismissal to sharp attention when Harold placed the laptop on her desk and began playing the recorded footage. This is from Friday afternoon. The subjects are now using the names Sarah and Michael Mitchell, but voice analysis and behavioral patterns confirmed they're the same individuals who targeted Mrs. Caldwell. We watched Detective Chen's face as she listened to Garrett and Sabrina lay out their entire scheme on camera. Her eyebrows rose when they mentioned joint ownership, and she sat forward when they described their experience with other homeowners. This is extraordinary evidence, she said when the video ended. They're explicitly describing a fraud operation. There's more, Harold said, pulling out printed transcripts. We have their complete conversation documented, including their admission that they avoid legal documentation to prevent accountability. Detective Chen studied the transcripts carefully. This changes everything. With this evidence, we can reopen the case and add new charges. Do you know where they're staying? The rental car is registered to a hotel on the interstate. Have the license plate and registration information. We'll coordinate with the DA's office and move on this immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, I owe you an apology. When we closed the case before, it was because we couldn't prove intent. This evidence makes their intent unmistakable. Our next stop was the district attorney's office. Assistant DA Patricia Vega had initially declined to prosecute Garrett and Sabrina, but when she watched the recorded confession, her attitude changed completely. This is textbook elder fraud with additional charges for identity theft and conspiracy. Mrs. Caldwell, are you willing to testify about your original experience with these defendants? Absolutely. Mrs. Thompson, would you be willing to testify about their attempt to defraud you? Margaret nodded firmly. Whatever it takes to stop them from hurting other people. By noon, warrants had been issued for the arrest of Garrett Vance and Sabrina Chen under their real names, with additional warrants for their aliases, Sarah and Michael Mitchell. The charges included elder abuse, attempted fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. But we weren't done yet. Harold had discovered something else during his research that would prove crucial. I ran background checks on their real identities. They've been operating this scam for at least 3 years in different states. I found property records showing they successfully stole 2 homes in Florida and 1 in Arizona before coming here. Successful thefts?
Elderly homeowners who lost their properties to fraudulent adverse possession claims, the victims either died during the legal process or were declared incompetent and placed in assisted living while these criminals took their homes. The scope of their operation was staggering. They weren't just opportunistic thieves. They were predators who specialized in destroying elderly people's lives for profit.
Detective Chen coordinated with law enforcement in Florida and Arizona. Within hours, additional warrants were issued in multiple jurisdictions. What had started as a local rental dispute had become a multi-state criminal investigation. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. It was Rachel. "Mom, I just got a call from a detective. She said those tenants of yours have been arrested for elder fraud?" "Yes, sweetheart. We caught them trying to scam another elderly homeowner and got it all on video." "Mom, I owe you such an enormous apology. I didn't believe you. I thought you were getting confused, and I was ready to put you in assisted living. I'm so sorry." "Rachel, you couldn't have known. These people were professionals at manipulation. They fooled everyone." "But you figured it out. You stopped them from hurting other people. I'm so proud of you." For the first time in months, I felt like I had my daughter back. The arrests happened at 6 p.m. Detective Chen called to let me know that Garrett and Sabrina had been taken into custody at their hotel without incident. They'd been in the middle of planning their next target when police arrived. We found lists of potential victims, research files on dozens of elderly homeowners, and evidence of previous successful frauds in other states. Mrs. Caldwell, you didn't just save yourself, you probably saved dozens of other seniors from being victimized. But the most satisfying call came the next morning from James Wickham, the attorney who had tried to convince my daughter I was mentally incompetent. "Mrs. Caldwell, I understand my former clients have been arrested. I want you to know that I had no knowledge of any criminal activity. They presented their case to me as a legitimate tenant dispute." "Mr. Wickham, you tried to have me declared mentally incompetent based on the word of criminals?" "I apologize for any misunderstanding. I was operating on the information provided to me." "The information provided by people who were running a systematic fraud operation? Maybe you should be more careful about which clients you represent." I hung up on him, just as he had tried to hang up my life. The trial took place 4 months later. Rachel flew in from Portland to support me, and Margaret, Harold, and I sat in the front row as Garrett and Sabrina, looking much less confident in orange jumpsuits, faced the consequences of their actions. The prosecution played our recorded footage, and I watched the jury's faces as they heard Garrett and Sabrina describe their scheme in their own words. Several jurors looked disgusted when they heard the casual way these criminals discussed targeting elderly homeowners. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Garrett and Sabrina as I described the months of manipulation, isolation, and psychological abuse they had inflicted on me. They didn't just try to steal my house, they tried to steal my sanity, my relationships, and my sense of reality. They made me doubt my own mind and turned my own daughter against me. They used my grief over my husband's death and my natural desire to help others as weapons against me. Sabrina stared at the table during my testimony, but Garrett had the audacity to look me in the eye. I saw no remorse there, only anger at being caught. Margaret's testimony was equally powerful. She described how they had immediately begun assessing her vulnerabilities and planning their takeover of her property. Within an hour of meeting me, they were discussing which walls to tear down and how to establish joint ownership. These people saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed from my own home. The defense attorney tried to argue that their clients were legitimate property consultants who had been misunderstood. He suggested that the elderly victims had misinterpreted normal business discussions.
The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for just 2 hours, they returned guilty verdicts on all charges. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Garrett to 12 years in prison and Sabrina to 10 years. She also ordered them to pay restitution to all their victims, including the families of the 3 elderly homeowners whose properties they had successfully stolen in other states. Mr. Vance and Miss Chen, you targeted the most vulnerable members of our society with calculated cruelty. You used their kindness, their loneliness, and their trust as weapons against them. This court finds your actions particularly heinous because they represent a betrayal of the basic social contract that protects those who need protection most. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Margaret, Harold, and Rachel. Media reporters wanted interviews about the senior citizens who brought down a fraud ring, but I only agreed to one statement. These criminals succeeded for years because they understood that elderly people are often isolated and that their adult children live far away. They knew that if they could make us seem confused or paranoid, no one would believe us. The lesson here isn't just about being careful with tenants. It's about staying connected with elderly family members and taking their concerns seriously, even when those concerns seem unlikely. 6 months later, my life had settled into a new normal that was better than anything I could have imagined. The experience had connected me with a community of people I'd never really known before. Margaret and I had coffee every Tuesday and Thursday. Harold had become my unofficial security consultant, helping me upgrade my home systems and teaching other seniors in the neighborhood about protecting themselves from scams.
Rachel visited every other month now, and our relationship was stronger than it had been in years. She'd learned not to dismiss my concerns, and I'd learned to trust her love for me even when she disagreed with my decisions. The neighborhood watch group we'd formed had prevented 2 other fraud attempts targeting elderly residents. Word had spread through criminal networks that Millbrook Heights was no longer an easy hunting ground for predators targeting seniors. Most importantly, I'd discovered something about myself that I'd forgotten during the months of manipulation and doubt. I was stronger than I'd realized. I was smarter than my attackers had calculated. And I was far more valuable than they had ever understood. 1 year after Garrett and Sabrina were sentenced, I received a letter from the Florida Attorney General's office. The investigation we'd started had led to the arrest of 6 other people operating similar fraud schemes across multiple states. Our evidence had helped recover properties worth over $2 million for elderly victims or their families. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Millbrook Heights City Council named me Senior Citizen of the Year for my work protecting elderly residents from fraud. At the ceremony, Mayor Jennifer Walsh said, "Dorothy Caldwell represents the best of what it means to be a community member. When she could have simply been grateful that her own crisis was resolved, she chose instead to protect others from experiencing what she had endured." As I stood at the podium accepting the award, I looked out at the audience and saw Margaret, Harold, Rachel, my neighbors, and dozens of other people whose lives had been touched by this experience. A year ago, I thought I was just a lonely old lady who had made a mistake with her tenants, I said. I learned that I was actually a capable woman who had been systematically targeted by professional criminals. The difference between those two things, between being a victim and being someone who is victimized, changed everything for me. I paused, looking directly at the elderly faces in the audience. To anyone out there who feels like they're losing control of their lives, who feels like they're being manipulated or taken advantage of, who feels like no one believes them, trust your instincts. Ask for help. Document everything. And remember that being older doesn't mean being powerless. Sometimes it means being experienced enough to recognize danger and wise enough to fight back. After the ceremony, Rachel and I walked through downtown Millbrook Heights together. She was staying for a full week this time, and we'd planned activities that would give us plenty of time to talk. "Mom,
I'm still so sorry about how I reacted when you first told me about the fraud. Rachel, stop apologizing. You learned something important about listening to people you love, and I learned something important about standing up for myself. We both grew from this experience. But what if you hadn't been strong enough to fight back? What if they had succeeded at having you declared incompetent? Then I would have lost my house, but I would have found another way to survive. The most important thing I learned is that my value as a person isn't determined by what I own or where I live. It's determined by what I do when faced with challenges. We walked past the house where Garrett and Sabrina had tried to destroy my life, and I felt no anger, no fear, no sadness. I felt pride. I had faced professional criminals who specialized in destroying people like me, and I had won. At 71 years old, I discovered that I was just beginning to understand what I was capable of. 6 months later, I got a call that proved the story truly had come full circle. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Officer Martinez with Orlando Police Department. We have 2 suspects in custody who claim to know you. They say you can verify their identities. It was Garrett and Sabrina. They'd been caught running another scam in Florida while out on bail pending their appeal. This time, they'd targeted a 73-year-old veteran and his wife, but the couple had seen news coverage of our case and recognized the tactics immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, these criminals are never going to stop, but because of your case, we now have a template for recognizing and prosecuting these types of operations. You've probably saved dozens of families from losing their homes. After I hung up, I sat in Benjamin's chair and thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year and a half ago, I'd been a lonely widow who trusted too easily and questioned herself too often. Today, I was a woman who had learned to trust her instincts, demand respect, and fight for what was right. The house around me was the same house Benjamin and I had shared for 47 years, but it felt different now. It felt like a home I had earned the right to keep, not through inheritance or marriage, but through my own strength and determination. Most importantly, it felt like a place where I belonged, not because someone allowed me to stay, but because I had proven I deserved to be there. At 71, I had finally learned the most important lesson of my life. I was nobody's victim unless I chose to be. And I would never make that choice again.
2 years after Garrett and Sabrina were sentenced, I woke up on my 73rd birthday to the sound of construction next door. Margaret Thompson was having a security system installed, one of the comprehensive packages that Harold's new consulting business provided to elderly homeowners throughout the tri-state area. Harold had transformed his retirement from corporate security into something more meaningful, protecting seniors from the kinds of predators who had targeted us. His company, Safe Haven Security Solutions, specialized in home protection systems designed specifically for older adults living independently. "Morning, Dorothy," Harold called from Margaret's yard as I stepped onto my porch with my coffee. "Happy birthday! We're almost finished here." I watched him directing the installation crew with the same methodical precision he'd used to catch our criminals. At 68, Harold had found his calling in protecting people like us. His business was thriving, but more importantly, it was making a real difference. Margaret appeared in her doorway, beaming. "Dorothy, come see the system Harold designed. It's amazing what technology can do these days." The security setup was impressive, but user-friendly. Cameras that looked like decorative outdoor lights, door sensors that sent alerts to family members if they weren't activated at expected times, emergency buttons disguised as ordinary household items. Most innovatively, Harold had created a buddy system network where neighbors' systems were interconnected, so if one person had an emergency, nearby allies would be automatically notified. The key, Harold explained as he showed me the control panel, is making the technology serve the person, not the other way around. Everything has to be simple enough that it feels natural to use. And it's all connected to the police department?
Police, paramedics, and a 24-hour monitoring service staffed by people trained specifically in elder care situations. Plus, all the neighbors in our network get alerts, so help is never more than minutes away. As I toured Margaret's upgraded security system, I reflected on how much our little community had changed. The attempted fraud that had nearly destroyed my life had somehow created something beautiful, a network of connected, protected, empowered neighbors who looked out for each other. After the installation was complete, Margaret and I walked to Rosewood Cafe for our weekly coffee. The same cafe where she'd first met Sarah and Michael Mitchell was now our regular spot for planning community protection initiatives. Harold told me he got another call from a police department in Texas. They want him to consult on an elder fraud case similar to ours. Harold's expertise had become nationally recognized. He'd testified before Congress about elder fraud prevention, consulted with law enforcement agencies in 15 states, and helped develop federal guidelines for investigating property crimes targeting seniors. Our local case had become a model for prosecuting systematic elder abuse operations. He's flying to Austin next week to train their financial crimes unit, Margaret continued. Can you believe that our little investigation is now being used to train police officers across the country? It was remarkable, but it also made sense. What we'd discovered wasn't just a local crime. It was a widespread problem that required systematic solutions. By fighting back against Garrett and Sabrina, we'd exposed a criminal methodology that was being replicated everywhere. Our conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice. Mrs. Caldwell? Mrs. Thompson? I turned to see a young woman in her early 30s approaching our table with nervous energy. She had short brown hair and wore a professional blazer, but something about her expression reminded me of my own desperation during the darkest days of my ordeal. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm Jennifer Walsh, not the mayor, different Jennifer Walsh. I read about your case in the newspaper, and I was hoping I could talk to you. Of course, Margaret gestured to an empty chair. Please sit down. Jennifer perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to flee at any moment. This is going to sound crazy, but I think my elderly aunt is being targeted by people using tactics similar to what happened to you. The words sent a familiar chill through me. Tell us what's happening. My Aunt Patricia is 78 and lives alone in Riverside County about 2 hours from here. 6 months ago, she rented rooms to a young couple who seemed wonderful at first, but lately she's been saying strange things about property partnerships and improvements they're making without her permission. What kind of strange things? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. She says they're helping her manage her finances and that they've made improvements that give them equity in the house. When I try to ask questions, she gets defensive and says I don't understand modern tenant relationships. Margaret and I exchanged glances. It was the same pattern, the same language, possibly even the same criminals operating under new identities. Jennifer, we need you to tell us everything you can remember about these tenants. Names, descriptions, when they moved in, anything unusual about how they approached your aunt. For the next hour, Jennifer described a situation that was eerily familiar. Her Aunt Patricia had been lonely since her husband died. She'd posted about needing companionship and extra income. A charming young couple had responded with references and cash deposits. They'd gradually taken over household decisions while claiming to be helping her.
The scariest part, Jennifer said, is that when I try to talk to other family members about my concerns, they think I'm overreacting. They say Aunt Patricia seems happy and that the tenants are probably just helpful young people. That's exactly how these operations work, I explained. They isolate the victim from family members by making the family seem paranoid or interfering. Has your aunt mentioned anything about legal documents or ownership changes? Not directly, but last week she said something about how property relationships are more complicated now than they used to be. She said her tenants have explained modern equity laws to her. Modern equity laws. The same pseudo-legal nonsense Garrett and Sabrina had used to justify their theft attempts. Jennifer, we need to act quickly, Margaret said. If this is the same type of operation, your aunt is probably about to receive some kind of legal notice claiming the tenants have ownership rights. What can we do? I live 3 hours away, and Aunt Patricia gets angry when I question the tenants. I made a decision that would once again change the trajectory of my retirement. We're going to help you save your aunt. But first, we need to call Harold and Detective Chen. If these are the same criminals or people using their methods, we need law enforcement involved from the beginning. That afternoon, Harold, Detective Chen, Margaret, Jennifer, and I met in my living room to plan what would become our third major intervention in an elder fraud case. Based on the details Jennifer provided, this has all the hallmarks of the Vance-Chen methodology, Detective Chen said. The timing, the approach, the language patterns. Either it's them operating under new identities, or someone is copying their techniques. How is that possible? I thought they were in prison. They are, but criminal methodologies spread. Other fraudsters study successful operations and adapt the techniques. We've seen at least a dozen cases across the country that followed the same pattern as the original Millbrook Heights fraud. Harold opened his laptop and showed us a map with red pins scattered across multiple states. These are confirmed cases using similar tactics in the past 18 months. All targeting elderly homeowners, all involving false equity claims, all using the same psychological manipulation techniques. The scope was staggering. Our case hadn't just exposed one criminal operation, it had revealed an entire criminal industry. The good news, Detective Chen continued, is that we now know how to investigate these cases. The bad news is that we need to catch them in the act, just like we did with Margaret. So we're going to set up another sting operation? Jennifer asked. Not exactly, I said, an idea forming in my mind. We're going to be more ambitious. We're going to create a model for how families and communities can work together to protect elderly members from systematic fraud. Over the next week, we developed what would become known as the Millbrook Protocol, a comprehensive approach to identifying, documenting, and prosecuting elder fraud operations while protecting the victims from further harm. The protocol had several components. First, family education. Jennifer learned to recognize the warning signs of elder fraud and how to document suspicious activity without alerting the criminals or alienating the victim. Second, professional intervention. Harold's security company would conduct a routine consultation with Patricia about home safety, giving him an opportunity to assess the situation and install monitoring equipment if necessary. Third, legal preparation. We worked with prosecutors to ensure that any evidence we gathered would be admissible in court and that appropriate charges could be filed quickly. Fourth, community support. Local neighbors would be educated about the situation and asked to watch for suspicious activity. Finally, victim protection. Throughout the process, Patricia's dignity and autonomy would be preserved. She would never be made to feel foolish or incompetent, and her concerns would be taken seriously, even when they reflected manipulation by the criminals. 2 weeks later, Harold drove to Riverside County to begin implementing the protocol. He presented himself to Patricia as a home security consultant recommended by her insurance company, a cover story that was technically true since her insurance company had agreed to cooperate with the investigation. The security assessment revealed everything we'd expected. The tenants, calling themselves David and Amanda Rivera, were following the exact same playbook Garrett and Sabrina had used to establish control over her finances, made unauthorized changes to her property, and begun discussing ownership rights. But this time, we were prepared. Harold's hidden cameras captured David Rivera explaining to Patricia that their improvements to her property had created partnership equity that would need to be legally recognized. Amanda Rivera was recorded discussing plans to help Patricia transition to a more appropriate living situation once the ownership transfer paperwork was completed.
Most damning were they were recorded discussing their previous successful partnerships with elderly homeowners, using language that clearly indicated this was an ongoing criminal enterprise.
The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning in March. David and Amanda Rivera were taken into custody while they were at Patricia's house, installing new locks without her permission. The same final step Garrett and Sabrina had planned with me. But the most satisfying part came when investigators discovered that David Rivera was actually Marcus Chen, Sabrina's younger brother who had been carrying on the family fraud business while she served her prison sentence. The Riverside County prosecutor charged Marcus Chen and Amanda Rivera with elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, and continuing a criminal enterprise. More importantly, they were connected to 4 other similar operations across California and Nevada. Patricia was initially confused and upset about the arrests, but Jennifer handled the situation exactly as we'd planned. Instead of making Patricia feel foolish for being deceived, Jennifer emphasized how sophisticated the criminals had been and how brave Patricia was for helping expose them. Aunt Patricia, you helped save other elderly people from being victimized by these criminals, Jennifer told her. The police said your cooperation was crucial to stopping them from hurting more families. Within a week, Patricia was living independently again, with Harold's security system installed and regular check-ins from Jennifer and local neighbors. She'd become an advocate for elder fraud prevention, speaking to community groups about the warning signs of manipulation. 6 months later, I received an invitation that filled me with pride. The National Association of Elder Rights Advocates wanted to present me with their Lifetime Achievement Award for my work in elder fraud prevention. The ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., with an audience of lawyers, social workers, law enforcement officials, and advocates from across the country. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I was a lonely widow who made a mistake with her tenants. Today, I'm part of a national movement to protect elderly Americans from systematic victimization. The difference between those two things isn't just personal growth, it's a fundamental shift in how we approach elder protection in this country. I paused, looking directly at the cameras that were broadcasting the ceremony live. To the criminals who prey on elderly people, we are not easy targets anymore. We are connected, educated, and prepared. We have security systems, family networks, legal advocates, and law enforcement partnerships. Most importantly, we have each other. The audience erupted in applause, but I wasn't finished. To the families watching this broadcast, stay connected with your elderly relatives. Take their concerns seriously. Learn the warning signs of elder fraud. And remember that the goal isn't to take over their lives, it's to empower them to protect themselves. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young journalist from the Washington Post who wanted to write a feature story about the grandmother who took down a fraud ring. Mrs. Caldwell, what would you say to other elderly people who might be facing similar situations? I'd say that being older doesn't mean being powerless. It means being experienced enough to recognize danger and wise enough to ask for help. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that you're too old to fight for what's right. What's next for you? I smiled, thinking about the plans Harold, Margaret, and I had been discussing. We're starting a nonprofit organization called the Senior Security Network. We'll provide education, resources, and support for elderly people who want to protect themselves and their communities from fraud. The journalist looked intrigued. A nonprofit run by and for seniors? Exactly. Who better to understand the challenges facing elderly people than elderly people themselves? We're not just going to be protected, we are going to be the protectors. 1 year later, the Senior Security Network had chapters in 37 states.
We'd helped prevent over 200 confirmed fraud attempts, assisted in the prosecution of 43 criminal operations, and provided security consultations for more than 1,000 elderly homeowners. Rachel had become our volunteer coordinator, using her marketing background to help spread awareness about elder fraud prevention. Margaret ran our speakers bureau, sharing our story with community groups across the country. Harold's security company had expanded into a national franchise, training local consultants in elder-specific protection strategies. Most importantly, we'd created something that hadn't existed before: a network of empowered, connected elderly Americans who refused to be victims. On my 75th birthday, I hosted a celebration in my backyard, the same backyard where Garrett and Sabrina had planned to establish their fraudulent ownership claim. The party included neighbors from Millbrook Heights, chapter leaders from across the country, law enforcement officials who'd worked on our cases, and family members who'd learned to take elderly concerns seriously. As the sun set over the garden Benjamin and I had planted together decades ago, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I'd gone from being an isolated widow afraid of losing her home to being a national advocate helping others protect theirs. But the most meaningful change was personal. I'd discovered that my value wasn't determined by what I owned or where I lived. It was determined by what I did when faced with challenges and how I used my experiences to help others.
Harold approached me as the party was winding down. "Dorothy, I have something to tell you. Remember that first day when you called me about Garrett and Sabrina's target list? Of course. I never told you this, but my name was on that list. They'd researched me as a potential victim before they settled on targeting you." I stared at him in surprise. "You were a target too?" "I was. But because you figured out their scheme and warned me, they never had the chance to approach me. You didn't just save yourself, Margaret, and all the other potential victims. You saved me too." As I looked around at the party filled with people whose lives had been touched by our experience, I realized that this was Garrett and Sabrina's true legacy. Not the homes they'd stolen or the lives they'd damaged, but the community of protectors they'd inadvertently created by trying to destroy mine. They'd intended to make me a victim. Instead, they'd made me a warrior. At 75, I was just getting started. The final toast of the evening came from an unexpected source. Detective Chen, now Chief Chen after her promotion, raised her glass and said, "To Dorothy Caldwell, who proved that the best defense against criminals who target the elderly is elderly people who refuse to be targets." As everyone raised their glasses, I thought about the scared, lonely woman I'd been just a few years earlier. She would have never imagined that her worst nightmare would become her greatest triumph. But then again, she would have never imagined how strong she really was. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever encountered someone trying to take advantage of you or a loved one? How did you handle it? What warning signs should people watch for? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself and protecting the people you love. Remember, you're never too old to fight back, and you're never too vulnerable to be valuable. Trust your instincts, ask for help, and never let anyone convince you that you don't deserve respect. Thank you for following my journey from victim to victor. I hope my story helps you or someone you love stay safe and strong.